Imagine that you join the army to fight for your country. You spend months or even years training and preparing yourself to enter combat, and as soon as you arrive at the front, you die due to a mistake made by your own side. When this occurs, it is known as death by friendly fire. Although it may seem that they are actions that rarely occur during a conflict, because they are often omitted in all books, the truth is that they are very common. When something like this happens, the event is silenced by the army, and the families of the fallen soldiers are informed of what really happened after the end of the war. Next, we're going to look at 3 of the most serious mistakes that the US Army made, which caused thousands of its soldiers to die from friendly fire. In chronological order, the first action that we are going to analyze in the program took place on July 11, 1943, in the vicinity of Sicily, and caused the loss of most of the 504th American Parachute Regiment. With the fall of Tunisia in May 1943, the Allies' next objective was the capture of Sicily and begin making their way through southern Italy. The operation was planned for the beginning of July. For the first time in their history, the Americans were going to use paratroopers on a mission, and the unit chosen was the 82nd Airborne Division. The landing on the southern coast of Sicily would be carried out by the 3rd American Infantry Division, and on the southeastern coast by English and Canadian troops before dawn on July 10th. However, just as would happen in Normandy a year later, the men of the 82nd Airborne Division would be dropped on Sicilia a few hours before the infantry landed on the coast. The 82nd Airborne Division's plan for Operation Husky, which would represent its first parachute assault, reflected the division's aggressive spirit. On the night of July 9th to 10, a total of 222 C-47 aircraft would launch Colonel James Gavin's 505th Airborne Regiment, reinforced by a battalion of the 504th, behind the beaches where the infantry would arrive hours later. The 2 remaining battalions of Colonel Reuben Tucker's 504th Regiment were to be ready at airfields in northern Tunisia to execute a second launch if necessary. This plan did not take into account the weather, enemy activity, or the navigation skills of the inexperienced pilots. The strong wind that hit the region, added to the intense German anti-aircraft fire, caused 425 of the 3,400 paratroopers launched. Only 425 fell in the planned area. The remaining 3,000 men were scattered throughout southern Sicily, and most were isolated. However, those few men fought like demons to take and hold a crossroads at Piano Lupo that overlooked the main landing beaches. Additionally, other members of Gavin's regiment, individually or in small groups, caused untold chaos throughout Sicily as they headed toward the American lines. Due to the difficulties that Gavin's paratroopers encountered in Sicilia, the remainder of the 504th Regiment was required to be sent as reinforcements. With the wind blowing at a lower speed and better atmospheric conditions, the operation was expected to be relatively simple. However, someone forgot to tell the American fleet off the coast of Sicily that they were going to be overflown by dozens of planes carrying paratroopers. At around 10:30 p.m., heavy German bombing hit Allied ships off Sicily just as C-47 aircraft carrying the rest of the 504th Airborne Regiment were flying over the Allied fleet. That's when a chain reaction was set off between nervous Army and Navy gunners. Suddenly, a .50 caliber machine gun located in the sand dunes several hundred meters from the coast began to open fire on the planes. As soon as the shooting began, the cannons along the coast until, wherever the eye could see, they opened fire, and the naval vessels off the coast began to fire their anti-aircraft guns. The massacre lasted a whole hour. When it was over, 60 of the 144 American troop transport planes flying that night had been damaged. The C-47 carrying Colonel Tucker returned to base with more than 1,000 holes in its fuselage. In this action, at least 318 men were killed or declared missing in action. On the other hand, the paratroopers who survived the launch were found scattered along 80 kilometers of the Sicilian coast. Days would pass until those who did not die instantly were captured or were killed in battles in total inferiority. As a final anecdote, it should be noted that the 504th Regiment could not participate in the Normandy landings due to the heavy casualties it had suffered in Sicily. The next accident that we are going to analyze took place during the month of April 1944 and was one of the greatest catastrophes of the U.S. Army during World War II. April 22, 1944. The Allies are about to begin their last major training exercise before the actual landings in Normandy. Dozens of ships of all types along with 30,000 infantry soldiers are preparing to simulate with live fire the landing that they will carry out a few weeks later in Normandy. The chosen place was Lyme Bay in the south of England, just 135 kilometers from Cherbourg. The first practice assault took place on the morning of April 27th and was marked by an incident involving friendly fire. H-hour was set for 7:30 and would include live ammunition to acclimatize troops to the sights, sounds, and even smells of a naval bombardment. During the landing itself, forces on the ground would fire live ammunition over the heads of incoming troops for the same reason. This followed an order given by General Eisenhower, who felt that the men needed to be hardened by exposure to real battle conditions. The bombardment on the beach would be carried out by the ships of the bombardment group of Force U 50 minutes before the landing of the infantry. Finally, several of the landing ships that were to disembark that morning were delayed, and the American admiral in charge of the exercise decided to delay H-hour for 60 minutes until 8:30. However, some of the landing craft received no news of the change. This caused them to disembark on the beach while the naval bombardment continued. In total, it is estimated that this error cost the lives of about 450 men. Despite the big mistake made, the exercise continued during the next day. On the 28th, the fleet transporting the soldiers was attacked by 9 German torpedo boats that discovered them by chance, and the result was once again tragic. 2 troop transport ships called the Landing Ship Tank were sunk with more than 600 soldiers in total. In this way, it is estimated that at least 800 American soldiers died during the Tiger Army, leaving a greater number injured. As a result of the embarrassment felt by Allied commanders and concerns about possible leaks just before the actual invasion, all survivors were forced to swear secrecy about the catastrophe that had just occurred. It was not until months later that what had happened in Lyme Bay became public. And finally, we go to the last catastrophe of the program, which cost the lives of hundreds of American soldiers during the final phase of the Battle of Normandy. To do this, let's place it during the last days of July 1944. Following the British attack on the outskirts of Caen, known as Operation Goodwood, the Americans prepared to deal the final blow to the German defenders of Normandy. Operation Cobra, scheduled to launch in mid-July, had to be delayed numerous times due to bad weather. By July 24th, the operation was given the green light, and the first bombers began to take off and headed for their target west of St. Lo. However, shortly after, the Allied High Command decided to cancel the offensive due to reports of worsening weather. The cancellation took place once the first planes had already taken off, and it was impossible to inform many of them that the operation had been canceled. In this way, some dropped their bombs on the indicated sector, resulting in the deaths of 25 American soldiers, along with another 130 who were injured. This was because the Allied ground units stayed close to the German ones because they did not retreat, since in theory, no bombing was going to occur. It was on the next day, July 25th, that the attack finally occurred. However, and unfortunately for the Americans, the bomber fleet once again suffered another error because the hatch of one of them broke down and dropped the bombs ahead of time, again dropping many bombs on the Allied positions. On this occasion, more than 100 American soldiers were killed and 500 were wounded. Among them was General McNair, who was supervising the operation from a forward command post. In any case, and despite everything, there is no doubt that the Germans took the worst part, mainly the Panzer Division Lehr, which was located west of St. Lo. The new mistake made by the Americans caused another 750 soldiers to be killed by friendly fire. So, what do you think about these types of events? Do you think that in a war as massive as World War II, they could have been avoided? Do you know of other similar cases? I read you in the comments box.